OMG. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Olivia here, your favorite confused American trying to make sense of this rainy, beautiful, and absolutely bonkers island called Great Britain. So I was down at the pub the other night, my local, the King's Head, you know the one, and I was chatting with my neighbours Dave and Sarah. They're in their late 50s, proper salt of the earth Brits. We got onto the topic of their childhoods, specifically the 1970s. And you guys, I was literally sitting there with my mouth hanging open. I dropped my crisp packet. I was shook because the way they described the UK in the 1970s, it sounds like a completely different planet. It sounds like a survival video game with bad graphics, amazing soundtracks, and zero safety regulations. In the US, we think of the 70s as disco, Star Wars, and maybe a little political scandal. But here, my friends describe it as this gritty, glorious, dangerous, brown and orange-coloured era of total anarchy. It's fascinating. So I've been collecting these stories. I've been grilling every British person over the age of 50 that I meet, asking them, is this true? Did you really do that? And compiling it all for you. Today we are going deep. We are talking about a time before health and safety, before digital footprints, and apparently before decent food. Grab your tea, or maybe something stronger, because we need to talk about the wild world of 1970s Britain. Let's start with the thing that absolutely blows my American mind the most, the toys, or should I say the recreational weapons they gave to children. My neighbor Dave told me about this thing called clackers. Have you guys heard of these? In the States, we have lawsuits if a coffee is too hot. In 1970s Britain, they gave kids two heavy, hard acrylic balls attached to a piece of string and said, go have fun, try not to shatter your wrist. The goal was to swing them up and down so they smacked together, clack, clack, clack as fast as possible. Dave showed me a scar on his forearm. He said, that's from when my clackers exploded. Exploded. Apparently, if you hit them too hard, the plastic would just shatter like shrapnel. These things were essentially hand grenades sold at the corner store, and the government took years to ban them. Can you imagine the class action lawsuit in the US? It would be billions. Here, it was just a rite of passage. If you didn't have a bruised wrist, were you even playing? And it wasn't just the clackers. Sarah told me about her brother's chemistry set. Now, modern chemistry sets are basically baking soda and vinegar, right? Safe, boring. In the 70s, you could apparently buy a box full of toxic substances. We're talking actual chemicals that could burn holes in the carpet, and frequently did. Sarah said her brother nearly gassed the entire upstairs of their terraced house trying to make stink bombs that turned out to be mild chlorine gas. And the parents, they weren't hovering, they were downstairs watching TV, assuming if the house wasn't actually on fire, the kids were learning science. Then there were the bicycles. Oh my God, the chopper. I've seen pictures of these. They look cool, I'll give you that. They have these high handlebars like a Harley Davidson and a massive padded seat. But here's the kicker, the gear stick. They put a gear shift lever right on the center frame, directly between a child's legs. I asked Dave, didn't that hurt if you crashed? And he just gave me this 1,000-yard stare and said, Olivia, you learn not to crash. It seems like the entire philosophy of 1970s British parenting was, experience is the best teacher, especially if that experience involves mild physical trauma. Now, let's pivot to something that sounds less like a childhood memory and more like a dystopian novel. My friends call it the 3-day week. When they first mentioned this, I thought they meant like a 4-day work week, like a nice work-life balance thing. No, absolutely not. In early 1974, the British government, led by Edward Heath, I looked this up, basically said, we are running out of electricity. There were massive strikes by the coal miners, and since the UK ran almost entirely on coal power back then, the grid was collapsing, so the government restricted electricity usage for businesses to 3 consecutive days a week. Sarah told me that as a kid this was actually kind of magical, which is such a kid perspective. She remembers the power cuts. They were scheduled. Can you imagine getting a schedule for when your lights would go out? She said the TV would just cut dead in the middle of a show, the room would plunge into darkness, and instead of freaking out, her mum would just sigh, strike a match and light candles. They had candles everywhere, not the scented self-care lavender candles I buy at Target. These were functional, waxy stumps. She told me they'd play board games by candlelight, or her dad would tell ghost stories. They had to boil water on a camping stove in the kitchen just to have a cup of tea. For a kid, it was an adventure. For the parents, it must have been incredibly stressful, worrying about money, bills, and whether the heat would come back on. But here's the thing that gets me, the stoicism. Sarah said nobody really panicked. There was no rioting in the streets. It was just this very British mustn't grumble attitude. They put on an extra sweater, huddled under a blanket, and waited for the lights to flicker back on. It's that blitz spirit my neighbors talk about, that hangover from World War II where you just keep calm and carry on, even when you're freezing in the dark in 1974. Speaking of being freezing, let's talk about the fashion. Because looking at my neighbors' photo albums, it's a lot. Why was everything made of plastic? Sarah showed me a picture of her in her school disco outfit. It was a dress made of something called crimplane. I had to Google this. It's a thick, heavy polyester that never creases, never breathes, and essentially encases you in a sweat chamber. She said if you stood too close to a radiator, you were a fire hazard. And the static. She said walking across a nylon carpet in a crimplene dress meant that if you touched a doorknob, you'd generate enough voltage to jumpstart a car. And the boys weren't safe either. Dave showed me his teenage photos. The collars on his shirts were huge. I mean, aerodynamic. They looked like he was preparing for takeoff. And the trousers, Oxford bags or flares that were so wide at the bottom, they completely covered his shoes. He told me they were a nightmare in the rain. The water would wick up the denim until you had wet fabric up to your knees. But the pièce de résistance was the tank top. In America, a tank top is like a sleeveless undershirt, right? Here, in the 70s, it meant a knitted, sleeveless sweater vest, usually hand-knitted by a grandmother, usually in colors that shouldn't exist in nature: mustard yellow, sludge brown, and vomit orange. Dave swears he looked like a stud, but in the photo, he looks like a walking upholstery sample. It reflects something interesting about the economy, though. People made their own clothes. Clothes were expensive. You didn't just go to Primark and buy a shirt for £3. If you wanted a new skirt, you often bought a paper pattern and some fabric, and made it yourself. That's a skill set that has almost completely vanished. But back then, being able to sew a straight line was a basic survival skill. Now, let's talk about school. Because if you think the toys were dangerous, the schools sound like correctional facilities. I was chatting with another guy at the pub, Mike, and he was telling me about the discipline. In the US now, if a teacher looks at a kid the wrong way, there's a parent-teacher conference and maybe a lawsuit. In 1970s Britain, the teachers were legally allowed to hit you. I'm not joking. It was called corporal punishment. Mike told me about the cane and the slipper. If you were talking in class, whack. If you ran in the hallway, whack. He said he once got the board rubber, the eraser for the chalkboard, thrown at his head from across the room because he was looking out the window. And the craziest part, the accuracy. He said the math teacher had the aim of a sniper. But here is the cultural difference that really shocked me. Mike said that if you went home and told your parents you got hit at school, you wouldn't get sympathy. You'd get hit again for being naughty at school. The parents and the teachers were on the same team. There was this absolute deference to authority. And the food, school dinners. Even the phrase makes my British friends shudder. They describe it as grey. Just grey. Grey mince, grey potatoes, cabbage that had been boiled for so long it had ceased to be a vegetable and had become a biological weapon. And the puddings, spotted dick. Yes, I giggled, I'm American, I can't help it. And custard. But the custard wasn't creamy, it had a skin on it, like a thick, yellow, wrinkled skin. Mike said you weren't allowed to leave the table until you finished. You'd be sitting there in the empty dining hall, staring at a cold lump of gristle, engaged in a battle of wills with a dinner lady who looked like she wrestled bears on the weekend. It sounds traumatizing, but they all laugh about it now. It's like a shared trauma that bonds the entire generation. Okay, let's leave the scary school and go home. Let's talk about the house, specifically the smells. Every time I walk into an old antique shop here, I catch a whiff of something that my friends say smells like the 70s. First off, cigarette smoke. Everyone smoked, everywhere. In the house, in the car, in the cinema, on the bus. Sarah said the living room ceiling was always a slightly different color than the walls because of the nicotine stains. It sounds gross now, but back then, it was just the smell of adulthood. Then there was the smell of paraffin heaters. Central heating wasn't standard yet. A lot of people just had these portable heaters that smelled like jet fuel. You'd wake up in the morning and see your breath in the bedroom air, seeing ice patterns on the inside of the windows. Can you imagine? I panic if my thermostat drops below 68 degrees. And then the food smells. Since nobody had ventilation hoods, if you had chips, fries, the whole house smelled like old oil and vinegar for 3 days. If you had cabbage, the house smelled like, well, old cabbage. But there's a cozy smell they talk about too, the smell of pledge, polish, and baking. Because convenience food was still kind of new, moms were still cooking a lot from scratch, even if the menu was a bit limited. Let's talk about that menu actually, the Sunday roast. This is still a thing in the UK, obviously. I love a Sunday roast, but in the 70s, it wasn't just a meal, it was a religion. Dave explained that Sunday was dead, stores were closed, no sports on TV until the afternoon. The entire country shut down. The highlight of the week was sitting around the table at 1 p.m. sharp, and the hierarchy. Dad got the best cuts of meat, then the mum, then the kids got whatever was left, and you had to behave. No elbows on the table, no TV, just the sound of cutlery scraping on plates and your dad complaining about the government. But after lunch, that's when the real nostalgia kicks in for them. They'd all sit down to watch TV. But get this, there were only 3 channels, BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. That's it. No Netflix, no YouTube, no cable. This meant that everybody watched the same thing. Sarah said it created this amazing sense of community. You'd go to school on Monday, and every single person had watched The Generation Game or Morecambe and Wise on Saturday night. If you missed it, you were socially isolated. You had nothing to talk about. They told me about this show called Multicolored Swap Shop. It was live on Saturday mornings. Kids would call in to swap toys. Sarah said she spent her entire childhood trying to call that number, dreaming of swapping her old roller skates for a radio. But she never got through because the lines were jammed with every kid in Britain. Then there was the dark side of TV, the public information films. Have you guys seen these? Look them up on YouTube later. They are terrifying. In the US, we had Schoolhouse Rock, cute cartoons about legislation. In 70s Britain, they had mini horror movies designed to traumatize children into safety. There was one about playing on train tracks that plays like a slasher film, one about playing near water, where the spirit of dark and lonely water, essentially the Grim Reaper in a hooded robe, snatches kids. They were nightmare fuel. Dave says he still gets nervous standing near a pond because of that hooded monk guy. But you know what? It worked. They were terrified of train tracks and deep water. Let's talk about money. The corner shop. This is the holy grail of 70s nostalgia for my friends. The local shop at the end of the street. This was a place of pure magic. You'd go in with your pocket money, maybe 10p or 20p, and you felt rich. They had these jars of sweets behind the counter. Cola cubes, pineapple chunks, sherbet lemons. You didn't buy a bag, you bought them by the ounce. The shopkeeper would weigh them out on actual scales and put them in a little white paper bag. Sarah got misty-eyed talking about 1/4 pound of sweets. But the economy of the playground was based on this stuff. A Texan bar, apparently a chocolate bar that took an hour to chew. Spangles, space dust that popped in your mouth. There's a funny historical context here too. In 1971, Britain switched to decimalization. Before that, their money was this complicated system of shillings and pence that I still don't understand. It sounded like Harry Potter money. But in the 70s, they switched to the 100 pennies in a pound system. Dave told me his granddad never got over it. He'd stand in the shop arguing that a Mars bar shouldn't cost 10 because that was 2 shillings or something. It was a decade of confusion where the old generation felt like their money was changing before their eyes. Now I want to touch on something a bit more sociological. The concept of playing out. This is the thing that makes me the most jealous. Sarah said she'd leave the house at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, she'd grab her bike, meet up with her gang of friends, and they would vanish. They'd go to the woods, they'd go to the bomb site. Yeah, there were still uncleared areas from WY rubble in some places. They'd build dens, they'd climb trees, and here is the kicker, no parents, no cell phones, no tracking apps. The rule was come back when the streetlights come on. That's it. That was the only rule. I asked Sarah, weren't your parents worried you'd get kidnapped? And she laughed. She said it just wasn't on their radar, the community watched out for you. If she was acting up 3 streets away, Miss Jenkins would see her and tell her mum. It was this web of surveillance, but it was human, not digital. They had this incredible autonomy. They learnt how to resolve conflicts because they couldn't just run to mummy. If you fell out of a tree, you rubbed some dirt on it and kept playing. If you got into a fight, you sorted it out. Dave told me about boggy carts or go-karts. They'd build these vehicles out of old pram wheels and planks of wood. No brakes, no steering really. They'd find the steepest hill in the neighborhood and just launch themselves down it. He said, Olivia, the feeling of speed on a wooden plank doing 30 miles an hour down a tarmac hill, nothing beats it. It sounds insanely dangerous to me, but he talks about it with this sparkle in his eye. It was true freedom. Compare that to now. We schedule play dates 3 weeks in advance. We track our kids on Life 360. We worry about everything. They didn't have much. Toys were simple, TV was limited, houses were cold, but they had the world outside their door. Of course, we have to talk about the music. I can't do a 70s script without the soundtrack. Glam rock. My friends get so animated about this. Top of the Pops was the Thursday night ritual. You had to watch it to know what was cool. You had David Bowie, looking like an alien from Mars, teaching kids that it was okay to be different. You had Slade and T-Rex. It was loud, colourful, and stompy. Sarah said she kissed a poster of Donny Osmond goodnight every single night for 3 years. But it was also the era of punk, the Sex Pistols, the Clash. Towards the end of the 70s, things got angry. The economy was bad, trash was piling up, jobs were scarce. The music reflected that. It went from the glittery escapism of Bowie to the spitting rage of Johnny Rotten. It's such a fascinating cultural shift to happen in just 10 years. So, bringing it all back together. Why do my neighbours get so emotional when they talk about this decade? It wasn't that life was easy. In fact, statistically, life was harder. We're talking about a time of high inflation, political instability, and grey food. But I think the nostalgia comes from the connection. Because there was less to do, you did things together. Because there were fewer TV channels, you shared the same culture. Because you didn't have a phone in your hand, you looked at the people around you. Because you had to wait for things, wait for the film to be developed, wait for your song to come on the radio, wait for the shops to open. The payoff felt sweeter. Listening to Dave and Sarah, I realized that I missed out on something cool. Not the polio risk or the lead paint, obviously, but the simplicity, the idea that a cardboard box could be a spaceship, that a bike ride could be an odyssey, that a 10p bag of sweets could be the highlight of your week. They lived in a tactile world, a world you could touch, smell, and feel. A world of scraped knees and muddy boots and laughter echoing down a street until the orange glow of the streetlights buzzed on. It's made me want to put my phone down a bit more. Maybe not turn off my electricity for 3 days a week. Let's not get crazy, but maybe just look up, walk to the store, talk to a neighbor. I hope you guys enjoyed this little time travel trip as much as I enjoyed researching it. I want to hear from you. If you have UK friends, or if you're British and watching this, are these stories true? Did you really wear crimpline? Did you survive a space hopper accident? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of them, and honestly, the comments on these history videos are always the best part because you guys have the wildest stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into British culture from your favourite outsider. I'm thinking of doing the 80s next apparently. The hair gets even bigger and the shoulder pads arrive. Until next time, keep calm and maybe check the expiration date on that Angel Delight. Bye guys.